Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever, stopped and thought about who you're really drawn to in stories? Or maybe even sometimes in real life?
Hmm.
It's often not the straight up heroes, the shining knights.
Mhm.
Sometimes. Sometimes it's the ones who are a little bit edgy, complicated.
Yeah, that's such a common experience, isn't it? That feeling of being captivated by someone who isn't purely good.
Exactly. It's a bit surprising when you think about it. Why are we drawn to the bad ones?
Well, that's exactly what we're diving deep into today. This whole fascinating, complex thing specifically, women's attraction to anti-heroes.
Okay,
And for this, we've got a great stack of sources. We're talking psychological research, some really insightful sociology, and literary critiques, too.
great. So our mission today is basically to pull out the key insights from all that, right? To help you understand not just that it happens, but maybe why.
Precisely. We're looking at the mix of things unconscious drives, maybe social narratives, those deep archetypes.
It's probably something you've wondered about yourself. Maybe watching a favorite show or reading a book you love.
Definitely. And just so we're clear on terms, when we say anti-hero, what do we mean?
Good point.
We're talking about main characters, protagonists, who don't fit the usual hero mold. They're morally complex, they're flawed, sometimes they're even violent.
But you still kind of root for them, or at least find them compelling.
Exactly. They evoke sympathy somehow. They're not just villains. Maybe they have their own code or some redeeming quality or a backstory that explains them.
Like Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. Or someone more modern, like Walter White in Breaking Bad.
Perfect examples. They really break the mold and they pull you in, even when their actions are questionable.
Okay, so let's start peeling back those layers. Where do we begin with the psychology behind this allure?
Well, a really fundamental place to start is attachment styles. How we learn to connect with people early on really shapes our preferences later.
Right. So how does that work? How do those patterns influence who we find attractive?
Well, research suggests, for instance, that women with what's called an anxious attachment style, they tend to really idealize partners who seem like strong, nurturing protectors.
Okay, someone safe, stable,
Yeah.
reliable. That makes sense.
Yeah, they're looking for that security. But then you have avoidant attachment.
Ah, okay, so what happens there? Is it the opposite?
It's more paradoxical. Sometimes people with avoidant attachment might actually find themselves drawn to personalities who are more dangerous or maybe emotionally distant.
Really? Why?
There was this one study, it was quite interesting. Avoidant women showed less attraction to the conventionally heroic types, but sort of indirectly, they were more drawn to characters described as villainous.
Huh. So, like, the predictability of a good guy is less appealing.
It could be. Or maybe it's that the emotional risk, the unpredictability of the bad boy doesn't trigger their fear of intimacy in the same way. Their attachment style kind of tolerates that emotional distance or danger.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about safety. It can be about a tolerance for or even a subconscious seeking of emotional risk.
Exactly. Which brings us to another angle. Thrill-seeking and evolution.
Right, that primal urge you mentioned. How does that fit in?
Well, we seem to have this innate drive for sensation-seeking. And evolutionarily speaking, a dangerous man, someone maybe perceived as strong, fearless, cunning, could have signaled good survival prospects.
Like a protector, resourceful.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
In our evolutionary past, maybe those fearless warriors were better at protecting their family, finding resources. So they attracted mates.
Is there evidence for that?
Well, there's anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon's work with the Yanomamo people. He found that women there often preferred the more charismatic, aggressive warriors. And those men tended to have more wives, more children.
So a kind of deep biological echo there.
Possibly, yeah. Something deeply ingrained.
And you mentioned a rush earlier. Is that chemical, like in the brain?
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of excitement, the thrill of risk or novelty, that's often driven by dopamine, our brain's reward chemical.
So the anti-hero's danger, their unpredictability, it could literally be giving someone a dopamine hit, making it feel addictive.
It certainly could for some people. It's a potent mix. The danger, the passion, the unknown. It can create a real neurochemical buzz.
Okay, that's fascinating. Dopamine, evolution. But what about deeper psychological stuff? Like I know Jungian theory talks about the shadow. How does that play into this?
Right, Jung's idea of projecting the shadow is really relevant here. The theory is that we unconsciously project parts of ourselves that we've disowned or repressed onto other people, especially romantic interests.
So parts we don't like or aren't allowed to express?
Exactly. So if a woman feels she has to suppress her own, say, anger or rebelliousness, or maybe a desire for freedom, seeing that embodied in an antihero can be incredibly compelling.
So the anti-hero becomes a kind of mirror for that hidden self.
Kind of, yeah. Or like he gives voice to it. It's a powerful connection, feeling like someone gets that hidden part of you or represents it.
It's like falling for a part of yourself you've kept locked away.
Precisely. And Jung also talked about the golden shadow.
Golden shadow, what's that?
That's the positive potentials we've denied in ourselves. Maybe intense creativity or passion or strength, things we felt were too much or not acceptable.
Ah, so the attraction isn't just about the darkness. It could be seeing our own potential strength or passion reflected back.
Exactly. Their defiance or charisma might resonate with a strength you haven't claimed in yourself. It makes the connection feel incredibly magnetic, deeply resonant.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, this leads us to something, well, a bit darker sounding. The dark triad.
Right. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a recipe for attraction. But the sources say these traits can correlate with attraction, at least short term.
They can, surprisingly. So narcissism, that grandiosity, self-importance, Machiavellianism being manipulative, strategic in relationships, and mild psychopathy, lack of empathy, impulsivity, thrill-seeking. Studies show these traits do often correlate with initial female attraction. Why? Because the outward signs, the confidence, the charisma, maybe the apparent success can be mistaken for genuine charm or passion or competence.
So they look good on the surface, even if the underlying traits are problematic.
Pretty much. One experiment even found women rated men high in these traits as more attractive, even when they could identify the darker qualities. The mystery, the seduction, it can create a strong pull, especially if someone's looking for excitement.
That seems like a slippery slope. Which brings us to something you flagged with a warning. Trauma bonding. That sounds serious.
It is very serious, and it's real important to understand. Sometimes a really intense attraction to a difficult or bad partner isn't healthy love. It's an unhealthy bond.
Like Stockholm Syndrome.
There are parallels, yeah. The core idea is intermittent reinforcement. It's not constant abuse, but a cycle. Warmth and kindness alternating with cruelty, neglect, or withdrawal.
That push and pull.
Exactly. That unpredictable pattern is incredibly powerful psychologically. It creates this deep, often addictive emotional attachment that's really hard to break. Think about gambling. It's the intermittent wins that keep people hooked.
Right. Dutton and Painter's study showed that with victims of abuse, right, staying attached even after leaving.
Yes, their classic study highlighted how strong that bond can become. So if an anti-hero figure, fictional or real, gives off that vibe, warmth 1 minute, coldness the next, it can tap into that addictive dynamic.
Especially, I guess, if someone has past trauma, it might feel familiar.
Precisely. It can unconsciously replay old, painful patterns.
Yeah.
And that's the danger. It feels like intense connection, but it's rooted in something unhealthy.
Yeah.
Potentially recreating vulnerability to harm in real life.
For a really crucial distinction. And one last psychological piece, the fixer fantasy. That feels very familiar.
Oh, yes. The I can fix him drive. It's everywhere in stories, and it definitely fuels attraction to troubled figures.
Wanting to save the wounded hero.
Exactly. It connects back to attachment, needing to nurture, maybe projecting your own desire for healing onto someone else. You hope to be the one who can reach them, change them.
Does it work?
Rarely, in reality. Real change has to come from within the person. Literature loves the drama of it, but often it ends in heartbreak, reinforcing the idea that you can't make someone change.
Okay, so those are some heavy psychological factors, but it's not all internal, right? What about the bigger picture, society, culture?
Absolute massive influence. Think about cultural myths and archetypes. Rebels, outlaws with a heart of gold, they're everywhere.
Yeah, like Robin Hood or...
Or Greek satyrs, those mischievous nature spirits. Or Chinese wuxia stories with their honorable rogues. Western gunslingers who live by their own code. These figures defy authority, live outside the rules, but often end up protecting the innocent somehow.
It's a recurring story.
A very powerful one. It taps into this collective fantasy of the dangerous protector.
You see that in movies, too, like gangster anti-heroes. They're often shown being brutal, but then weirdly kind to kids or respectful to elders.
That's a perfect example. Scholars point that out, blending the violence with a kind of warped chivalry. Looking after their community, protecting women in their own way. It makes them complex and, weirdly, romanticized.
That mix of toughness and maybe hidden sensitivity.
Exactly. We seem drawn to that complexity. And then there are gender expectations layered on top of that.
How so? How does social conditioning make bad boys more appealing?
Well, one idea is that women are often socialized to be very empathetic, responsible, maybe prone to guilt or self-blame.
Right. Take on a lot of emotional labor.
Yeah. So subconsciously, they might be drawn to a partner who seems free from all that. Someone unapologetically rebellious, not burdened by the same constraints.
Like admiring their freedom from the rules.
Kind of. It offers this vicarious thrill, maybe a glimpse of life without those heavy expectations.
That makes sense. And of course, media and our friends, they must amplify this massively.
Oh, hugely. Think about how often novels, films, TV shows glamorize the anti-hero. James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause.
Classic. Or more recently, Peaky Blinders, The Sopranos.
Exactly. These stories pull you into the character's world, make you empathize with their struggles, even their flaws.
And then everyone talks about it, shares memes, maybe even dresses up like the characters.
Right. Peer culture really reinforces it. Joining fandoms, discussing theories online, it all intensifies that emotional connection. You know Tommy Shelby is bad, but the community around the show celebrates his charisma, his brokenness. It becomes a shared obsession.
And this isn't just a Western thing, is it? You see these types of characters worldwide.
Absolutely. Peaky Blinders has fans everywhere, Brazil, South Korea. The appeal is global. Japan has its lone Ronin figures, the masterless samurai. Latin America has heroic, rebellious revolutionaries. Every culture seems to have its version of the flawed, charismatic outsider.
And does it change with age, maybe?
Yeah, there's nuance there. Younger audiences might really connect with that teen rebel energy. Older women might find themselves drawn more to a world-weary anti-hero, maybe seeing more depth or tragedy in their story.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to the specific types of anti-heroes we see in literature and media. The big one has to be the Byronic hero, right?
Oh, absolutely foundational. Lord Byron really set the template in the 19th century, partly based on his own scandalous image.
So what defines a Byronic hero? Intense, brooding.
Intense, brooding, passionate, definitely defiant. They're usually proud, cynical, rebellious, haunted by some secret sin or past trauma, but utterly magnetic.
Like Heathcliff, you mentioned him earlier. He's so dark, so cruel sometimes, but you can't look away.
Exactly. He owes a huge debt to Byron. Readers get drawn into his obsessive devotion, his raw, tortured soul, even while they're horrified by his actions. It's the sheer intensity that grabs you.
Reminds me of that quote about Byron himself, Lady Caroline Lamb.
Mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Yes.
Yeah.
That perfectly captures the allure and the peril of the Byronic type.
Beyond Byron, there are other types too, right? More tragic figures or morally gray ones?
Definitely. Think about Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost. Technically the villain, but his eloquence, his internal conflict, his rebellion against impossible odds, it makes him incredibly compelling. Some call him the first real anti-hero.
And you see echoes of that today.
All the time. Walter White, like we
Right.
said. Arthur Fleck and Joker. We see their pain, their reasons, their dissent. It makes us, well, maybe not root for them in the traditional sense, but we understand them. We watch intensely.
It plays on that hope for redemption maybe, or just understanding the why.
Exactly. Understanding why someone might break bad. And these archetypes are everywhere, with female characters often drawn right into their orbit.
Can you give some more examples of that dynamic? The anti-hero and the woman drawn to him.
Sure. Kathy and Heathcliff, obviously. Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester, he's got secrets, a dark past, moral failings.
Right. Very Byronic in his own way.
Definitely. In film and TV, think Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. Initially seems cold and proud, but there's that hidden depth, that vulnerability.
Okay, yeah. Tony Stark, Iron Man.
Good one. Flawed genius, reckless, arrogant, but ultimately heroic. Sort of. Even someone like Dexter Morgan, the serial killer protagonist. Fascinating, even if deeply disturbing.
So what's the common thread? Troubled past, defying society.
Yeah, often those things. And this promise of a unique connection, like, only I understand you, or only you can save me, it makes the female character feel special, chosen.
Wow. So we've covered a lot, the psychology, the culture, the literary types, but we absolutely have to talk about the big caveat here, the fantasy versus reality.
This is probably the most critical point for everyone listening. Indulging in the anti-hero fantasy in a story, that's one thing. It's safe. We can explore dark themes from our armchair.
But real life?
Real life is very different. Being involved with someone who is genuinely manipulative, dangerous, or emotionally unstable, that carries real risks. significant harm.
So romanticizing those traits is dangerous. We talked about trauma bonding earlier, that cycle of intermittent reinforcement. That's where this really hits home, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Psychologists strongly warn against blurring these lines. Remember Dutton and Painter's work. That unpredictable pattern creates incredibly strong, unhealthy attachments that are hard to escape.
And wasn't there research linking attraction to fictional villains with attitudes towards real-life violence?
Yes, Freud and colleagues found a correlation for some people.
Mm-hmm.
An attraction to villainous characters could relate to normalizing or being more tolerant of couple violence in reality.
That's sobering.
It is. It highlights the real peril. If you idealize these fictional anti-heroes too much, you might unconsciously lower your guard, making yourself more vulnerable to problematic or even abusive dynamics in your own relationships. It's thrilling in fiction, potentially very damaging in reality.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. Key takeaways. This attraction to anti-heroes. It's super complex.
It really is. It's this mix of our own individual psychology, attachment styles, maybe sensation-seeking, projecting those hidden shadow parts of ourselves.
Including those golden shadow positive potentials, too.
Right. And sometimes, sadly, it can tap into unresolved trauma through dynamics like trauma bonding.
And then layered on top of that is the cultural stuff, those myths of the noble rebel, the dangerous protector.
Exactly. Social narratives, gender expectations, and of course the constant reinforcement from media and literature, which have celebrated these complex, flawed figures for centuries, from Heathcliff to Tony Soprano.
Across cultures, across generations. It's a powerful storytelling trope.
It really is. It speaks to something deep in us.
So ultimately, the appeal, the allure of the anti-hero, it's partly fantasy, letting us explore darker, edgier themes safely. But it's also a reflection of something within us, right?
Yeah, a reflection of our complexities, our hidden desires, maybe even our hopes for redemption, the idea that passion could save a troubled soul.
But, and it's a big but, always with that critical warning, that phrase about Byron comes back again.
Mad, bad, and dangerous to know. That's the reality check.
Yeah.
The challenge is appreciating the fantasy, understanding the psychological draw, but always distinguishing storybook romance from real-life risk.
It definitely makes you think. So for you listening, what does all this mean for how you understand attraction? How do your own internal drives and all these external messages shape who you see as heroic, both in stories and maybe in life?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to chew on.